I'm Lucy.
And I'm Jennifer.
You're listening to Everything I Know About.
Each week, we share everything we know about a new topic, equipped with some internet research and a little too much exposure to pop culture.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, everyone.
Welcome to our second year in review of books.
2024 best books. This year, I feel like, Lucy, you and I are going to have a lot of overlap because we've been not only working on Pagebound, but doing a lot of podcast book club picks and Pagebound read-along picks. So we actually read a lot of the same books this year.
Yeah, which is probably not how it ever was any previous year.
No.
A different taste. Okay, so I took a peek at what we discussed crazy a year ago in this episode that we recapped 2023. And we started with a discussion around what goes into making a book a favorite for each of us. And I was curious if that has changed at all for you. Last year, you said things that matter to you are staying power, the quality of writing, and that you love complex character novels and darker emotional themes like nostalgia, yearning.
Damn, I have not changed at all. If I had to re-say that, I would say that exact thing. The only thing I would add is if it makes me cry, then it's almost definitely a 5-star. I did have one book that we read this year that made me cry that was not a 5-star, but that's an anomaly.
What was the book this year that's not a 5-star that made you cry?
Migrations.
Okay.
We read it
together, yeah.
The podcast book club, yeah. That was November's pick, but I definitely teared up at the end. Ended up being like a 4-star book for me. Like, it was just so slow. And then at the end, it had a ton of emotional impact. So like the overall experience wasn't 5-star, but it's an anomaly.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, my answer from last year was that I like a book about the complex inner lives of characters, quiet novels, which basically when like nothing really much happens in the plot, but it's all about the vast inner lives of the characters that you get really invested in. And yeah, I also said that I like when books can say something profound about the meaning of life. And I do really care about craft. And I would say that is still mostly true. One of my picks for this year is a bit out of the box because it's actually a fantasy novel.
Ooh.
And that's a new thing for me. It's a new genre. Working on Pagebound has really pushed me to expand the boundaries of what I read, which has been really fun and exciting. And reading this like fantasy novel reminded me of a lot of the books I read in my childhood because I was like very into YA. Like I read all of the popular series, obviously Harry Potter, but also like Artemis Fowl, like the Percy Jackson series, literally every major YA series. And I remember like never being able to put those types of books down and like reading into the wee hours of the morning. And it's been many years since I've gotten another book like that as an adult. Prior to this year, I mostly read litfic. And while litfic is great and I love it, it's rare that the plot is so intensely juicy that I cannot go to sleep.
Yeah. No, I have that same experience. I'm looking for that high of the YA middle school feeling of like when you're reading Harry Potter or like Twilight for the first time. That is such a high. So one of my goals for 2024 was to read more fantasy because I wanted that so bad. And I did not accomplish that goal. So 2025 will be the year. I'm reading Mistborn, my first Brandon Sanderson soon.
Yeah.
That's going to start before the end of the year. And I'm hoping getting into the Brandon Sanderson universe is going to make me feel like I was reading Harry Potter again for the first time.
I've heard really good things about that series. Okay, so the other little question I had before we dive into our picks is I'm curious if anything about your relationship with reading has changed now that we are working on Pagebound. A year ago, we had not even started on Pagebound, and now we co-run a reading site. So I'm curious if any of our features have changed the way that you interact with books.
Dang, that's a really good question. Honestly, I feel like the way that I've interacted with reading since being on Book Talk and then now on Pagebound, each thing has shifted my reading habits a little bit, and I'm trying to reel it back in. So what happened when I joined Book Talk was people were talking about the same like 20-ish books over and over again. This was like the Colleen Hoover stuff, Taylor Jenkins Reid. And I felt behind, even though I'm an avid reader. I was like, oh, I'm not part of the broader conversation, so I need to read all of these books. I'm glad I did to be part of the conversation, but they weren't my favorite books in the world. So I ended up feeling like I had a lackluster reading year. And a little bit of that happened when we joined Pagebound. I feel like I read a lot of books that I wouldn't have normally picked up, which was a really positive thing. And I loved being able to see what other people were thinking and posting in the forums. And like, you can only have that experience if you're reading books that other people are reading. So that I really, really have enjoyed. I'm trying to stay more true to what I naturally gravitate to so that I'm reading more of those like 4 and 5 star books. Because if I'm just like picking up a book because a bunch of people have read it, I feel like I have a to-do list, like a reading to-do list. Like, oh, I got to knock out these like 15
Oh,
books rather than just like, I think we talked about this last year too, that feeling of like being like a kid in a candy store when you go to the bookstore or the library and you stumble upon something instead of like already knowing what all the titles are and like how many people are reading that book. It's just like, oh, I discovered this little treasure on my own. So
yeah.
I'm searching for that feeling again for sure.
Yeah, you had said you were going to, in 2024, try to not know as much going in
Oh yeah,
about the
bullshit.
books.
Page one totally ruined that. But it's been so fun. So I want to like balance it for sure. Like there can be, 2 books a month that are just like random picks and then 2 that aren't.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What about you? Has Pagebound changed your habits at all?
I think it was more of a stark difference for me because prior to Pagebound, I was not a Goodreads user. Like I wasn't using any online tool other than Libby to get my books. But I literally had no place where I kept my library history. I never wrote reviews. I never even really looked at what other people thought of books. Occasionally, the most I would do is like I'd be in a bookstore browsing and then I would see something that looked interesting. And then I would maybe check out the Goodreads reviews and be like, okay, is this relatively high rated? But I wouldn't even read other people's reviews before deciding if it was a book that I was going to put on hold on Libby.
Wow.
Yeah.
True kid in the candy store vibes.
Yeah, definitely heavily driven by like how pretty the cover is, not gonna lie.
Yeah. It's like how we pick out wines. Like you just look at the
Yes,
title and like how pretty the label is.
absolutely. Yeah. The cover and the blurb, a great activity to spend a couple hours browsing all the books. But then I would be done. Like I would do that and then be good for like 6 weeks. Because then I would have all of these books on hold on Libby. Because I don't buy books. I go to bookstores, but I don't buy the books. I was always a library kid, raised a library kid. My parents would never let me buy books growing up, and that habit has stuck. So I just put them all on hold, and then over time they like trickle in, and then it's nice because I get a little surprise. Often I've like forgotten about the book I put on hold because I didn't have any context prior to seeing it in the bookstore, So I just read the blurb for a second, put it on hold, and then, usually I have to wait like 12 weeks for these really popular books. But then they come in and I'm like, oh, I like vaguely remember this. That's always been what has, prior to this year, influenced my TBR. But now I am fully on board into this reading app world. And
Thank God we've converted you.
yeah, I have a very long TBR. It is heavily influenced by the people that I follow on Pagebound and all of our book club picks, both for the podcast, but also we have the seasonal read-alongs on Pagebound. And I've been reading every single one of those books. And it's truly like really, really changed my reading habits. I think on the pro side, it's just so fun to like read with other people. And as a person who never even posted reviews, I have gotten a lot of enjoyment out of posting reading updates and getting that like social media boost of endorphins when people like my reading update and respond to it. And it definitely feels much more like a community activity, whereas reading to me in the past always felt like a solo hobby. Now it feels like when I read, I know other people are reading and I'm excited for us to all get to that same point of the book together. Definitely a brand new experience to me. And then I would say even after I finish a book and writing a review, I've found that to be such an eye-opening experience too, because it has honestly been so many years since I've written in a non-business, non-work context. And I was shocked to find that when I started writing reviews, it was hard. It was like, wow, my writing skills have really deteriorated. I often am like searching for a word that it's on the tip of my tongue, but I have to like Google and be like, what is this word? Like, I cannot think of it. And I always thought that, oh, I'm such an avid reader. Like, I read a book a week. I'm keeping up my vocabulary. I'm keeping up my writing skills just from reading. But it's honestly been so many years. It's been like 10 years since I was in college writing on a regular basis for my English degree. And yeah, I was very sad to find that it's much harder for me to put what I mean and like my thoughts into words. And this is not even fiction. This is just like trying to communicate my thoughts. Like I'm so used to texting or like the informal conversation where you don't really have to be very precise with what you mean. And like writing a review of a book for me, it feels much more permanent. And I like want to capture how I felt in the moment so that I can remember it because I totally see that value. A lot of the books I read earlier in the year before Pagebound even went live, I look back and I'm like, wait, what did I think of this book? Because I don't have a review. And that never bothered me in the past. But now that I'm writing some reviews for some books ever since Pagebound launched, I'm like, oh shit, I have to go back and review all of my favorite books because otherwise I'll forget. So it is like a little pressure. Yeah, that's the downside.
Writing the reviews, though, it like locks in your experience.
Mm.
You've synthesized it and put it into words, and it somehow makes it stick more for me. Like if I don't review a book, I kind of forget how I felt about it or what it even was about.
Yeah.
But once I review it, it's like, oh, I remember that for pretty much ever.
I've heard that from people who like take notes when they're reading too, which I mean, I did for school, of course, but I never did that for reading fiction because it just made it feel more like work. And so I think the downside has been like, I'm still trying to figure out that balance. Like now when I read, sometimes I feel the pressure to be like, am I thinking anything? Should I be posting something? Or like thinking ahead and being like, okay, is this going to make it into the review? As someone who is doing a lot of this stuff for the first time, it's still not very second nature to me. So I have to like remember and then feel like I had something brilliant to say, which I think a lot of people deal with that. But honestly, I'm trying to come to terms with the fact that like I'm not a professional reviewer. Like it really doesn't matter. I should be okay like just putting out how I feel, even if it's not super polished.
Yeah, definitely. I struggle with that too. I think everyone does. It's hard.
Okay, so without further ado, let's get into it.
All right. I struggled with figuring out what my top 3 were, but I did feel like I knew what my number 1 was. And my biggest standout book for 2024 was The Wedding People. This book was a huge surprise because the cover kind of looks like it's going to be a rom-com situation. So I had it sitting on my shelf for a while. I'm subscribed to Book of the Month, and it was one of my Book of the Month picks. And I was like, I'm not really in the mood for a rom-com. So I left it. And then finally I picked it up, and from like the first 2 pages, I was like, holy shit, this is a beautiful literary fiction book. And I had no idea. And it opens with this woman. Her name is Phoebe. She's going to Rhode Island, and we don't really know why. All we know from like the second chapter on is that she wants to die. So she's planned her own suicide at this hotel in Rhode Island. And there's this huge, beautiful wedding going on. And she's the only person who's not a wedding guest at the hotel. She gets into the elevator with the bride, and she's like, I'm going to go kill myself. And the bride's like, no, you're not.
She says that?
Yeah. And the bride's like, no, you're not. It's my wedding. You're going to ruin my wedding. You're not killing yourself. And so she sits with her and has this conversation. And long story short, Phoebe becomes kind of a part of the wedding, like befriends the bride. And this all sounds very cheesy, but it's not at all. The entire story it's so poignant and talks so much about grief and what it means to live a meaningful life and want to keep going another day. I cried multiple times during the book. It was so beautiful. Like the protagonist's journey to like ultimately deciding to live and go on and build a beautiful life for herself. It was so perfectly done. And if you're going through a breakup, if you're going through a hard time in life, if you're going through like a massive change, this is the kind of book that you want to read, because she literally goes from being like, my life could not get any worse, I want to leave, to by the end of it saying, there's so much out there for me to discover, and I am excited to live another day. It was beautiful.
Amazing. Yeah, I have not read that book. I mean, I've seen it all over bookstores and I have it on hold, but I haven't gotten it yet. But I saw it was like one of Goodreads' Choice Award winners.
Yeah, it won for fiction.
Mm-hmm. Who is the author?
Alison Espach.
Oh, I haven't heard of her.
Yeah,
This is not her first book, is it?
I'm looking at her profile right now. No, it's not. She wrote Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance. That sounds familiar. That was 2022, though. So what was do you have like a number 1? How did you do yours? Is it like a ranked system, or do you just have 3 equally top 3?
Yeah, I didn't rank them. I just have 3. And then I have 5 honorable mentions.
Oh
I
my
read
gosh.
a lot this year. Yeah, so I had trouble narrowing down the honorable mentions. I'll just start with 1. This is not ranked. But my first book is The Fetishist by Katherine Min. Have you heard of this book?
I have. It's one that's on my list to read.
Yeah, it has a very beautiful cover. That is what initially attracted me in the bookstore. It's this hot pink cover, and on it is a picture of a pufferfish. So very interesting cover. And when I read the little book flap, immediately I was like, oh, this is immediately a must read, because it bills itself as a Lolita retelling, but about the fetishization of Asian women. And I love Lolita. I feel like it's such an interesting, complicated book. And this book, The Fetishist, delivered on that, but for a topic that is very close to my heart as an Asian American woman and as a person who is married to a white man. So the little blurb is, on a cold, gloomy night, 23-year-old Kyoko stands in the rain with a knife in her hoodie's pocket. Her target is Daniel, who seduced Kyoko's mother, then callously dropped her, leading to her death. But tonight, there will be repercussions. Following the unsuspecting Daniel home, Kyoko manages to get a rash kidnapping plot off the ground, and then nothing goes as planned. So it is very much a lit fic book, but as you can see by that little plot blurb, it has the plot of a slapstick comedy, Like, it's very strange and arresting. And from the very first chapter, you're introduced to Kyoko, who is this fascinating, gripping character. And she's like the chaos agent in the novel. And there's a couple perspectives that the book is told from. One is hers. Another is Daniel, who is the titular fetishist. He's a white man who his first love was this woman named Alma, who is a cello prodigy. She also has her own chapters and perspective told in the book. And ever since Alma and their relationship not working out, he has only ever been with Asian women. And he is now middle-aged. Alma is middle-aged. We find out very quickly that Alma is very sick, no longer able to play the cello. And you have these three very fascinating characters who, at first, they're just living entirely separate lives. But yes, very quickly, their storylines intertwine and they're pushed together in these really interesting ways. And as a person who this year read a lot of books about the topic of being Asian in America, like one of our podcast book club picks was Disorientation. You picked that book, actually.
Yeah, that one was wild.
Yeah, so that book, and then I'd read Yellowface last year. And then I'd read The Fetishist at the beginning of this year. And so I've been reading a lot of books around this topic, but I actually think The Fetishist did it extremely well. As I was reading, there was so many passages where I was like, Avery, you got to read this. This captures my experience exactly on what it's like to be an Asian American woman. One issue I had with Disorientation, which is the book club pick, was that I think it did a good job of talking about all these really complicated topics like power dynamics, white supremacy, misogyny, the media portrayals of Asian women, etc. But it wasn't fun to read. It was a slog for me, at least, and it was just kind of depressing the whole time. And I felt like The Fetishist, yes, it addressed all those issues, but it was still a novel that had an exciting plot and outrageously interesting characters that I was invested in, and it had this momentum so that while all of these questions were being brought up in my brain, I was still also wanting to finish the book. Like, I was driven to see what happened. And so it was just a lot more effective for me. I feel like Yellowface had some of that too, but it was obviously told more from the perspective of the white woman.
Yeah.
And this, I really liked having not only Alma, but also Kyoko. Looking at some of the other reviews on Goodreads, I was interested to see that people who rated it lower, they felt like Katherine Min was too easy on Daniel, or that the book was just kind of messy and unfinished. And I will say, there's a note in the beginning of the book that explains that this book was published after Min's death. So she died from breast cancer. Her daughter
Oh my God.
is actually the one who packaged the book to get it ready to be published.
Wow.
Yeah, so Katherine Min actually wrote this book about a decade ago. She had deemed it abandoned, like she wasn't planning on pursuing publication during her lifetime. And it was only after she passed away that her daughter picked up the pieces. And I'm so glad, because honestly, I thought it was an incredible book. I didn't feel like it was messy or unfinished. I just felt like that's the reality. There are no answers here. It's not like you're going to walk away from this book having some sort of, this is what I should do, or this is how I should feel about this topic. As someone who had to navigate these topics for myself throughout my dating life, I think it is messy, and that's the reality. So for me, it was definitely a 5-star read. It felt really real, but also crazily prescient. The fact that she wrote this 10 years ago and then it was published this year. And that's obviously after all of the post-COVID Asian hate crimes and the 2021 Atlanta spa shootings.
What word did you just say? Prescient?
Yeah. Is that not how you say that word?
I don't even know what that word is. I was like, damn, okay, vocabulary queen.
It means when the work was forward looking.
I feel dumb as hell right now.
Wait, I knew that word, but I don't know if I've ever said it out loud.
I'm Googling it. Apparently it's prescient, but I still haven't heard that word.
Prescient.
I still haven't heard that word. Okay, English degree coming out.
Well, I said it wrong, so.
I'm dying. Okay, that is going to have to go up higher on my list then. I love a good lit fic that has a propelling plot, but
Yeah.
is still deep somehow, which you don't get those often.
Yeah. You gotta be able to do it all.
Speaking of doing it all, my next pick really did it all, and that is The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. I ate this one up. I loved it so much. It was a little bit on the longer side. I think it's over 500 pages. And I brought it with me when I was on vacation in Florida. And I just had such good memories sitting on the beach, reading this book. every second that I had that I wasn't working or hanging out with my fam, I was picking up pages of this book and I like couldn't wait to get back to it. And I haven't had that feeling in a while. Like there were only a handful of books this year that really gave me that feeling. The God of the Woods is a literary thriller. This one is very akin to I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Makkai, which was also one of my favorites last year. So I think that's why I really loved this one so much. This is set in the 1970s, and we're following a few different perspectives here. So each chapter jumps around from a different perspective of either a counselor or a child attending this summer camp. And there's a very rich family that owns the land that the summer camp is built on. And we also jump timelines. At the beginning of each chapter, you literally have a timeline telling you what day you're on and which year and like whose perspective it's from. So like the story gets very complicated very quickly. The whole premise is the rich family who owns the camp, their daughter, Barbara, she's a rebel. She doesn't quite fit in and she goes missing on the first page. And the entire story is figuring out what happens to Barbara. But there was so much more to it than just like a whodunit or like what happened to Barbara mystery. Like we're really diving into the dynamics of the family, the dynamics of the camp, even the auxiliary characters, you know, like the camp counselor who discovers that Barbara's missing. We dive into her life and like how the interplays of her past relationships and her past mistakes are feeding into this whole mystery with Barbara. Like what happened to her? Like somehow everyone is involved and everyone's secrets are contributing to this mystery of like, where is Barbara? And there's a beautiful ending to it that I absolutely will not spoil, but we do get like a satisfying tie-up of all of these different threads that were pulled out throughout the 500 pages. And there are so few mysteries, fantasies too, honestly, where the plot gets super complicated and then at the end you feel like you really had a satisfying answer to everything. Like usually I'm like, but you pulled out this card over here on page 300 and we never like circled back to it, or like not everything quite fits in. This one, everything fit in absolutely beautifully. And there's even little Easter eggs on the cover. And once you just know all of the details of what happened to Barbara, you're like, okay, I almost need to go back and reread this again because the details are so poignant here. And yeah, I absolutely love this one. Lucy, I know you read this one too. This is one of our page-bound read-along picks. And I think everyone who read this one enjoyed it. I haven't seen a negative review about this one yet.
Yeah, I definitely agree with some of the highlights that you said. I was definitely kept guessing, which I think is tough to pull off and surprise. And it was fun to do it as the read along and like see everybody's reactions.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, it was very fun to see who people thought was the kidnapper or killer. Like, we don't even know if she was killed or not throughout the entire book. So, like, is she dead? Like, did this person kill her? And, like, there were so many different theories throughout the entire thing. So that's just indicative of how complex and on your toes you were this entire reading experience.
I honestly think having the page-bound read-along and like the book forum with this improved my experience of the book, though. Probably if I had read it alone, I would have liked it less. Because I read this book after a lot of people had already finished it. Like, it just took me a long time to get the hold on Libby. And so over the past few weeks, I'd seen people posting, but of course they always put the spoilers. So I would never uncover the spoilers because I knew I was going to read the book. And then when I was reading, as soon as I would get anywhere, I'd be like, okay, I'm 25% through. Like, let me go check page-bound. Then I can uncover everything that already happened pre-25%. And I found that to be really exciting because actually I love murder mysteries. Like, I'm a huge Agatha Christie fan. I love Sherlock Holmes. And it would have been so cool had I had that experience for those types of books the first time I was reading them, you know? For me, like, a lot of times I'm in my own brain being like, oh my God, I just noticed that. Was that intentional? Or like, was that supposed to throw me off? And I have like all of these questions that I, in the past, have had nowhere to go to. Because often I would Google, I'd be like, has anyone noticed this? But then it would only be like spoilers or only like reviews that like, you know, we're talking about the ending. So there's really no place on the internet for like, I'm literally at 50% through this book. What are people feeling? What are people thinking? Now it's become a little ad for PageBound, but that's genuinely how I felt.
This was not supposed to be an ad for PageBound. Sorry, our product is just so good. We have to talk about it.
So funny. Anyway, yeah. Well, the next book I read before we were even on PageBound. So
proof this is not an ad.
Yeah, this book is The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. This is a very well-known book because it was shortlisted for the Booker in 2023. So I'm sure people have seen it all over the bookstores. Have you read this book, Jennifer?
No, but you've told me to. And yeah, it's one that I've seen all over the place. And I feel like I just need to read it to be part of the zeitgeist.
Yeah, it's so good. I actually think you'd really like it as a person who really likes Jonathan Franzen, which I know we share that interest.
Love him. Yeah.
And Anne Patchett, too. I feel like this book is very evocative of her work. Also, one of my favorites, James McBride. So this book is like right up my alley. It is a book about intergenerational families. And all the history and consequences and baggage that we have. The little blurb is, the Barnes family is in trouble. Dickie's once lucrative car business is going under, but rather than face the music, he's spending his days in the woods, building an apocalypse-proof bunker with a renegade handyman. His wife, Imelda, is selling off her jewelry on eBay, while their teenage daughter, Cass, formerly top of her class, seems determined to binge drink her way through final exams. And 12-year-old PJ is putting the final touches to his grand plan to run away from home. Where did it all go wrong? A patch of ice on the tarmac, a casual favor to a charming stranger, a bee caught beneath a bridal veil. Can a single moment of bad luck change the direction of a life? And if the story has already been written, is there still time to find a happy ending?
Is this a quiet novel?
It is set in suburbia, set in that kind of typical quiet novel bubble. But like, unlike Franzen's novels, which I would say Jonathan Franzen truly writes the quiet novel, there are some dramatic turns in this plot that a typical family would not go through, I would say. So I think it's kind of on the border. The blurb and even the title, The Bee Sting, like really made me think about, you know, that phrase about like a butterfly flapping its wings?
Yeah.
Something random.
The butterfly effect.
Yeah, it
yes.
could have an effect somewhere else. That is essentially the role of the bee sting in this novel. So I thought that was just a clever twist on that concept that we're all familiar with. And I'm endlessly impressed by authors who can write so convincingly from different perspectives. Paul Murray was able to do that here, and I'm sure that's why he was nominated for the Booker, is because each chapter is a perspective from a different member of the family, and there's a teenage girl, there's a 12-year-old boy, and then there's the parents. And truly, you feel like you are like a teenage girl. I'm like, how is Paul Murray able to write from this perspective? How does he know what it's like to be a teenage girl? I don't know, but it felt convincing to me as a person who was once a teenage girl. I found that super impressive. Definitely a 5-star read for me. Okay, give me your last pick.
My last pick was actually one of the first books I read this year, also before Pagebound. So this was also an audiobook. It's the first time that an audiobook has made my top even 5 of the year. And this is Happiness Falls by Angie Kim. So I loved this. Okay, I have a hard time recommending this one, though. This is one of those that I'm like, I really liked it, but I don't know if other people would really like it. So take this endorsement with a grain of salt. Also, if you do end up reading it, I highly, highly recommend the audiobook. I'm just going to go for the blurb with this one because it's a little bit of a complicated plot line. So here we go. We didn't call the police right away. Those are the first words of this extraordinary novel about a biracial Korean-American family in Virginia whose lives are upended when their beloved father and husband goes missing. Mia, the irreverent, hyper-analytical 20-year-old daughter, has an explanation for everything, which is why she isn't initially concerned when her father and younger brother Eugene don't return from a walk in a nearby park. They must have lost their phone or stopped on an errand somewhere. But by the time Mia's brother runs through the front door bloody and alone, it becomes clear that the father in this tight-knit family is missing, and the only witness is Eugene, who has a rare genetic condition called Angelman syndrome and cannot speak. What follows is both a ticking clock investigation into the whereabouts of a father and an emotionally rich portrait of a family whose most personal secrets just may be the heart of his disappearance. So Eugene is the center of the story, and he has Angelman syndrome, which
You're
is...
saying his name is so weird.
Eugene?
Eugene? How do you say it? I put emphasis on the second half of the word.
Eugene?
Eugene?
I don't actually know anyone named Eugene, so...
Wait, now I'm picking on your pronunciation. You're going to look it up.
I'm looking it up. How do you say Eugene? Oh! Vindicated. In English, it's usually pronounced as Eugene. Yes.
Eugene?
Yes.
No. No way.
Look it
Eugene?
up. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I just Googled Eugene pronunciation, and then the first thing that came up from YouTube.
The following pronunciation is brought to you by Pronounce Name.
Could you hear that?
Yeah.
Eugene.
This source says Eugene. The gene is capitalized.
What the hell?
Eugene.
I guess it could be either. I also just YouTubed it. Okay, maybe the algorithms are feeding us what we want to hear.
Watch this. This is what I saw.
Jennifer, this guy has an accent.
Maybe I'm doing the British pronunciation.
Yeah, this guy, I don't know if he's French or something. I mean, his name is Julien Michel.
I'm sorry, I'm just too cultured to say it the American way.
Yeah, I don't know if I trust Julian's guide.
No, maybe I have the French pronunciation. Eugene. I wouldn't be surprised.
It's funny. Okay, sorry. We can get back on track.
Okay.
Tell us about
Anyway.
Eugene.
Okay, Eugene has Angelman syndrome, which is a form of autism where you smile a lot. That's why it's called Angelman's, because you present like an angel, like you're just happy and smiling all the time, but they are nonverbal. There is little known about what their mental capacity is because they're nonverbal, so it makes it very difficult to figure that out. So the whole premise is Eugene and his father are on a walk. The father doesn't come home. Eugene is the only one who knows what happens to him, and so they're trying to communicate with him. And she's so sparky and she's so pretentious too, which I love. Her voice was so voicey, like being in her head and like listening to her narration, I found so entertaining. But we get into a lot of philosophical topics with this because Mia finds her father's writing at one point and he's trying to figure out the meaning of happiness. And they go down really intense philosophical tangents about like stoicism and like the neurobiology of happiness. And it all ties back into the plot and how they can communicate with Eugene. So this was not only a really interesting thriller, but also, again, a portrait of a family, but very like deep philosophical about the meaning of life, the meaning of happiness, how we communicate with each other, what it means to be human. And those kind of broad level philosophical books always tend to touch me. And I actually listened to this one twice on audiobook. Like as soon as I was done, I went back and listened again. I felt like there was just so much that I could pick up on a second time. And I loved listening to Mia's narration. There's also these really interesting footnotes, which I love a good footnote when it's done well. So yeah, this was just overall a huge 5-star read for me. As somebody who has mental disability in my family, I thought it was like an excellent portrayal of mental disability and like the struggles of having a family member that you need to take care of like that, but also like how much joy and intelligence they can actually bring despite their own disabilities. So I just thought it was beautiful and it was very touching.
Yeah, I read that book too. It was an honorable mention for me.
Oh,
but I actually read
perfect.
the physical book. Yeah, or the Kindle version. Yeah.
Okay, so you can tell me what the experience was like in a physical.
Yeah, I thought it was really good. I could see why it'd make a really good audiobook. I agree with what you said about her voice as a narrator. I love a spunky girl.
Yeah.
All right, my final pick. You read this. This was from a Pagebound read along.
Ooh.
My last pick is a fantasy book. It's called One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig.
I was not expecting that one to be your last pick.
That's what I'm saying. It's really, I think Pagebound has really opened up my eyes. Yeah. This is a 5-star read for me, and the sequel to Twisted Crowns I read immediately after and also was 5 stars. It was a book that I literally could not put down. I was up till 3 a.m. reading. And then luckily I had like a Kindle Unlimited free trial during this period, and both of these books are on Kindle Unlimited. And I didn't know anything about these books going in, so I didn't realize, this is like a well-known fact, I guess, that the first book is a huge cliffhanger. It almost is just the first half of the story. So for me, I like put both of these books as my third pick because I don't feel like it's complete without the second book. And as soon as the first book ended, I think it was already like 2 a.m. and I started reading.
Oh my God.
So yeah.
Did the second one pick up right where the first one left off? Was it an easy transition, or did you get into like backstory again? And
from what I remember, it picked up right where the first one left off. Yeah.
That's fun.
But you haven't read the second one? I know you've read the first one. Damn. Okay. So you did not like it that much.
No, I liked it. I really enjoyed it. But I just have so many books that I want to get to that it wasn't like the next thing I need to read is the second one in this duology. Like I wasn't that hype.
Yeah. Well, I think this one for me, it definitely gave me those like what I was talking about at the beginning of the episode with like Harry Potter, childhood, middle school vibes, where I just was so captured by the story. And I honestly, I mean, I don't read a ton of fantasy, so maybe my takeaway is like I actually really like fantasy. But I think what it did really well is the main female character, she is also the monster, which is just like very interesting to me as a conceit. And so immediately I think I was just psychologically very interested, like what an author could do if your main protagonist, who is also a woman and she's nobility and she's like beautiful on the outside and she fits all of these like conventional tropes around like what a princess or heroine should look like. But then she is also this really scary, dark monster trapped inside of her head. And you definitely do have some like tropey things. Like her love interest is the classic enemies to lovers trope.
Honestly, I ate that storyline up. I loved the romance. He was a good male protagonist. I loved that.
Yeah. So I obviously knew what was going to happen.
He was like very hot in my mind's eye.
It was good. It was juicy.
Yeah.
And then the world, the fantasy world, I also thought was really interesting. Like the magic system. I'd never heard of a magic system like this, where it's actually based on like essentially a deck of cards. If you have the card, you wield the power, which, again, as someone who's not so exposed to fantasy, usually in my brain, it feels like power in these fantasy worlds, it's just like given to you or you're like special for some reason and we just have to all believe it. So I really liked how the magic was actually divorced from the person. Technically, anybody could wield this magic, and you could be like one type of person, and then you could see the magic actually corrupt you. And then you could also lose the magic and like see what that does to you as a person, because you're just a temporary holder. So
Yeah.
I thought that was also really interesting to explore.
Yeah, definitely. I have such a scarcity mindset with resources, even like water. Like I hate using too much water, or like I hate food waste, all of that stuff. I'm always like thinking about how much I'm using. And in the magic system here, it's every time you use the power, it, like you said, corrupts you. And it kind of like can actually like turn you crazy if you use it too much. So every time someone would just flippantly use their resource, I was like, dude, you're giving me anxiety. Stop it. Like, stop just like trying to show off with your little power. Like, use that shit when you need it. So that was, it was a really interesting interplay though. Cause like you said, I've never seen a magic system where it's like the resource of magic is scarce.
Yeah, totally. And it comes with trade-offs. I mean, I feel like that is explored in other worlds. Like, obviously, Voldemort, power corrupts him, right? But it's interesting to see, like, if you have to make it on these incremental decisions where it's just like, oh, well, there's just this one time and you can't see the big picture. Like, what are you really giving up? Yeah, basically, I would say it's like a classic fairy tale story where there's a kingdom at stake, there's good, there's evil, there's magic, but with these kind of interesting twists. And so I think that's what elevated it for me and made it so interesting, even from the outset. And then the rest, truly, like, I think the author, Rachel Gillig, just did a really good job storytelling. Like, I just found the plot to be very immersing. I really wanted to know how it played out. And it wasn't obvious to me at all at the end of the first book if the people that you're rooting for would triumph. It really felt like the stakes were high. And so that's why I really wanted to finish.
Beautiful. I'm so glad that you got exposed to something so out of your box and loved it. Okay, I'll start my honorable mentions. I have 3 honorable mentions, which we'll just go through very quickly. Phantasma, The Will of the Many, and Margot's Got Money Troubles. So Phantasma was very out of the box for me. I don't love reading romance. I hate to say it, I really wish I did. That's not like me being an asshole. That's like, I feel bad about the fact that I don't like reading romance because I know people love it so much. It encourages them to read like 300 books a year and stuff. So I wish I was a romance lover. I don't know. I just find it cringy. I'm sorry. This is not cringy at all. I ate up Phantasma. Phantasma is like a gothic, spicy, dark romance, but it's set in like a haunted castle. And the main character has to go through the 7 rings of hell to like meet the Devil King and like get a wish granted to her. Each level that she goes through has like a trial that's related to one of the 7 deadly sins. It's super interesting how it plays out, but like the ghost that's helping her through the haunted mansion is her love interest. So you have paranormal like ghost sex scenes. It's like, it's like really spicy. It's done so well. It was not cringy at all. Again, this one's like over 500 pages and I think I read it in like 4 days. It was so good. Totally outside of my comfort zone. I don't even know what prompted me to pick this up. I think the cover was really interesting and I really liked the idea of the 7 deadly sins playing into some like trial game. I thought that was really cool, but I was just like so pleasantly surprised by this. So if you're somebody that doesn't typically love spicy romance stuff, I so highly recommend this one.
Amazing. I'm going to read it. Glowing review.
You should. It's in one of our Patreon quests too. The Games and Trials quest. That one.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so on my list of 5, The God of the Woods, Happiness Falls were on my honorable mentions list, and then also Migrations, which we kind of already touched on. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we can chat about Migrations a little bit more because you and I have not totally talked about that much. So let's do that.
Okay. Yeah, I think I like this book a lot more than you, based on our reviews. But yeah, Migrations for me, I did cry at the end. I found it to be super moving meditation on grief. And it's a story where the main female protagonist, she is following the Arctic terns on their migratory path from the North Pole to the South Pole. And she has so much trauma in her life and has to overcome so many obstacles during this journey. It is both an adventure novel as well as just this lit-thick work of art that has so many passages and quotes that I just wanted to like save in my pockets, like truly beautiful imagery. It's definitely like a winter novel, like a lot of cold imagery. It's also like futuristic in that it's set in a world just slightly more in the future from ours where like most of the animals have become extinct. I found that very powerful. It just gave the whole book this sense of like warning and foreboding because it felt like very real and very threatening in that way. And it is somewhat of a mystery as well because she's just so mysterious. Like you don't know anything about this main character. I think you get like halfway through the book and you're still like, what is happening?
Yeah.
You're questioning all the time what has happened in her past. There's like a lot of misdirection. And then it does finally become clear at the end. And I found that payoff rewarding. So yeah, I think the only thing that's my slight knock on it is like, I do think it's slow paced. It's a slow burn, but it is also really short. Like I feel like it's only 200 pages. So I think if you're looking for just like a beautiful piece of art, it definitely is worth the read.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely beautiful piece of art. Like the intrigue kept me going for sure. There were so many parts of it that I felt like I could speed read or skim over, and I didn't lose anything in doing that. I didn't love that part. That's the only reason that it was like I think I rated it ultimately a 3.5. It was just a little bit too slow for me.
Yeah.
But definitely still happy I read it. All right. So next up on books that I am surprised I loved so much, The Will of the Many by James. I don't know how to pronounce his name, so apologies in advance, but James Islington. Okay. So this one is a true fantasy novel. It's set in like an ancient Rome adjacent world, which drew me to it initially because I love ancient Rome. No, I am not a podcast bro, but I do love ancient Rome. I'm not even going to try to explain the magic system of this book because honestly, it's so complex. But essentially, like you have people that give up their will, literally think of like your will to do something. They give that up to the elites in the society. So the more people you have giving you your will, the more powerful you are. And so they'll be called like a senator that has like 300 people's will. And so he's very powerful. He's very strong, intelligent, fast, all that stuff. So our main character basically refuses to give up his will. And it's all of his trials and tribulations trying to hide the fact that he hasn't given up his will yet. But it was like, I think over 600 pages. It was like 650 pages of small print with like Bible thin pages. It was so hard to read. But I think reading books that are so long like that force you to really just like surrender, sink into it, be like, I'm going to be on this journey for a few weeks. It makes me enjoy it more, even if that book is maybe a bit slow on the payoff, which this one definitely was. Like there were long stretches where not much happened and it was just really character building. But I felt this way about Babel similarly too, where it's like once you just surrender to the experience and like let it happen and know you're not going to be blowing through this in a week, I end up enjoying it so much more. And this definitely gave me that experience. I'll definitely be continuing on with the rest of the series. This one is like super beloved. I'm looking on Goodreads right now. It has a 4.62 star rating average.
Oh my gosh,
which is really high.
So high.
Yeah, super high. So yeah, if you are a fantasy lover, or even if you're not, honestly, this is my first true like high fantasy novel. Loved it.
Wow. I'm impressed reading all that small, tiny font. Do you think it would work as an audiobook? Like those types of books, I'll do the audiobook. Like I did Dune on audio.
Oh, wow. I mean, you tend to have more success with audiobooks than I do. Like I'm so picky about them. But I did talk to somebody who didn't love it, who listened to it on audio. And I was like, oh, that was probably why. But
okay. All right. My next honorable mention is Blue Sisters by Coco Malors.
Oh, I'm surprised by this one.
I really liked it. Yeah.
I have intentionally not been reading this because I thought the blurb sounded so fucking boring. I was like, there's no way.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'd read Cleopatra and Frankenstein and honestly didn't think it was anything that special.
Same. Yep.
But it was funny because in some of the reviews on Pagebound that I was seeing after I read this book, like someone was like, I loved Cleopatra and Frankenstein. I didn't like this book. So I was like, oh, interesting. Maybe you like one or the other. I think this book is pretty different from that book. Like I felt like it was a way deeper book than Cleopatra and Frankenstein, which I feel like was a lot like a Tessa Mushfeg's work, but like a little worse, honestly, than her work. But this book, I felt like this was more in league with like a Franzen-esque type novel. This is about 4 sisters and just their lives. It's definitely a quiet novel. All the sisters are really different to one another, and one of the sisters dies. So it is about how the other 3 sisters come together, cope with grief, and try to move on with their lives. And there's a lot of family trauma from their parents that they're all carrying, and I found it really heartwarming how all of them support one another, but it's also very real in all of the struggles that they're facing. And it definitely wasn't like a favorite of mine, but I definitely thought it was good enough to be an honorable mention for sure.
Cute. All right. Last book for me is Margot's Got Money Troubles. This is by Rufy Thorpe. I adored this one. I almost put it in my top 3 of the year because it was a 5-star, actually. It wasn't even a 4.5. It was like a straight 5-star. I read this when I was in a bit of a reading slump and it pulled me right out. I finished it in a week, which was a lot for me at the time. Like I was not finishing books very much. It was funny, lighthearted, but still somehow very impactful emotionally. And it kind of like changed my outlook on motherhood, which is very hard to do because we've talked about this, but I'm somebody who's very hesitant about motherhood. So this is about a 20-year-old college student who has an affair with her professor. She ends up getting pregnant, and the professor pays her to get an abortion, and she can't do it. She's like, whatever, I'm just going to raise this baby by myself. She quits school and she has no money. Her mom, I think she's a Hooters waitress, and so she can't really help her. They have like a very tense relationship, and her father was kind of in and out of her life her entire life, and he was a professional pro wrestler. So Margot literally has no money, has no idea what to do, finally reaches out to her dad, and her dad comes and moves in with her and helps her with the baby. And they have this romp of a relationship. It's so fun. He's struggling with a pill addiction. She's helping him with that while he's helping her with the baby. She also like starts an OnlyFans account. And so that's the premise of the story, is like she's on OnlyFans and like dealing with being a new mother with her dad with this opioid addiction. And then also trying to grow her OnlyFans account. And then her pro wrestler dad is helping her build her persona for OnlyFans, because obviously that's what you did in WWE. You like build your persona. So the whole interplay is so cute and interesting and like deep but lighthearted at the same time, because like you're getting all of these like really intense themes, but it's done in such a way that you're like laughing while it's happening. And Margot just adores her son, and it doesn't shy away from how difficult motherhood is, especially at that age. But her love for her son the entire time really shone through the pages. And I thought it was just beautiful and kind of changed my perspective on the entire thing. So I highly recommend. Loved it.
Sounds like a good book. I feel like I've seen that one all over. It's an older book, right?
No, it came out this year, over the summer.
Oh, this year? Oh, wow. Then I've just seen it everywhere.
Yeah.
So it must be popular. But yeah. Well, you know what? Blue Sisters, one of the sisters, she is a pro boxer. So maybe that'll make you more inclined to read it. Yeah. The sisters are interesting. One's a model, one's a pro boxer, one is an overachieving lawyer. So they're all really different.
Maybe one day.
It's a bit of a personality test who you like, which sister you relate to.
Okay, which one did you like? Can I guess?
Okay, go ahead.
The lawyer?
Yeah, obviously. Obviously. I mean, I can't say I related to the model.
I mean, Love.
Okay. My last book is I Hope This Finds You Well by Natalie Sue.
I've been seeing this one everywhere.
Yeah, it was great. It's a pretty short book. I think if it had been longer, maybe it would have made it into my top 3. It is a office comedy. Yeah, I mean, literally think like The Office. I definitely think it has some of those vibes in the tone. The main character, Jolene, is an admin worker who, due to some fluke with some technology, she accidentally gains access to everyone in the office's private emails and DMs. She decides not to tell anyone and just starts to spy on all of her colleagues, trying to use the intel to basically help her not get laid off. Like everybody's aware of an impending layoff, and help her compete with her office enemy in terms of getting promoted over her. And it's super funny, entertaining. She herself is definitely like struggling in her life. She has an addiction issue. She is Persian, and she has overbearing but kind parents who are really trying to pressure her to start dating, get married, settle down. She has her own apartment, and the stakes are very high for her because if she were to get laid off and lose her job, she'd have to move back in with her parents. She has no money. Yeah, it's basically just this whole office drama playing out throughout the course of the plot, but then also Jolene growing as a person and figuring out her life. And I think she has definitely some super relatable moments, and I found it to just be like very heartwarming.
Beautiful. I've heard so much about this one. I also think it was a nominee for 2024 for Goodreads Choice Awards. So yeah, I'm going to have to put that one on my list too. The Never-Ending TBR. I knew this was going to happen when we talked. Of course it was.
All right. Well, hopefully our listeners also have a full TBR now.
Let us stalk your TBRs on Pagebound if you're not already on there. And you can stalk ours too, of course.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll see you soon. Bye.
Happy reading. If you enjoy the pod, we would love for you to give us a follow and rate us on Apple Podcasts, which helps us get the word out and reach new listeners. Our sources are available on Patreon, where if you choose to become a patron, you'll also get access to bonus content, our monthly book club, and our eternal gratitude.
If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a topic for a future episode, email us at everythingiknowaboutpod@gmail.com or DM us across all socials at EikaPod, that's EIKA pod. Thanks for listening and see you next week.